everyone, welcome to week 3 of the Captain's Run. I'm here with the Elephants team and we have Captain John Rennie and as well as our conservation coach, Dave Christensen. We're going to have a great discussion. I'm going to hand over to the captain himself, John Rennie, to motivate his team and get into this. So welcome to you all and over to you, John.
Thank you, Cyrus, and what a great honor it is to have Dave here to actually lead us and teach us a little bit about ecology and saving the environment. And to my Elephants team, we're very close to the top of the leaderboard, boys, and Sam. So if you can just make sure that you participate, let's have a lot of fun and let's learn something more today and see what we can do to make a difference in the world of conservation.
So thank you very much for that motivation, John. Dave, I know that you've got a topic that's very dear to you and you want to discuss that. So I'll hand over to you to just sort of run us through the topic itself, and then we'll get into the discussion thereafter.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. John and the team, guys, we really appreciate all that you do for us. I mean, this you guys with your sort of followings and that in sport, have a much bigger reach than you realize. And I think that what a lot of people don't realize is that as individuals, we can make a difference. And then collectively, the difference that we can make is actually unbelievable. So today's topic of conversation is growing human populations, which is the biggest threat to conservation. And a lot of people don't sort of really think about that aspect of conservation because they're all sort of thinking about the sort of proverbial anti-poaching and basically trying to stem an issue that's there. And as I've said previously, anti-poaching and things like that is a problem that will never go away. We will always have to do anti-poaching to some extent. But by and large, that is not the cause of the problem. And really, until we start addressing the cause of the problem, we're never really going to be able to win the battle. And so with the growing human populations, that is the cause. And there are many issues why in Africa in particular this is a major problem, because obviously Africa is the one continent left in the world that actually has, well, first of all, it's huge. I mean, I don't know, you guys can even Google it. Most of the world basically fits into Africa. The whole of Europe, North America, most of Asia will fit into Africa. It's a huge continent. And we have some of the, still some of the best and most untouched wild areas left. And when you talk about conservation, even a lot of the big conservation organizations like WWF and people like that, they have completely moved away from the principle of trying to save individual species. Because you cannot save an individual species without saving an entire ecosystem. And so it's all about maintaining ecosystems. And we have some of the most intact ecosystems left on the planet. But with our growing human populations, that is the biggest threat. If you have a look at the screen, there's Africa's population, which is 1.338.985 billion, and have a look at how it's increasing. Literally every second, we're adding another person to the population of Africa. So essentially what it means is that within the next 20 years, Africa's population is going to double. So the threat of that is obviously, it's self-explanatory, in that basically the more people you add to the equation, the more there's going to be an increased demand on whatever resources are available to sustain life. So that it's quite a sobering thought just to see that every second there's another person being added to the population in Africa. Now go across to the average age of those countries, and have a look at the average age: 18, 19, 25, 17, 28, 18, 20. So basically, Africa's got a very, very young population. And so what does that mean? That only means that it's going to continue to grow at an exponential rate because, because the population is now getting into that age where they're actually going to start having children. The issue with that, and why is it that Africa has such a problem? Well, part of it is existing cultural beliefs where people believe that it's their cultural heritage and it's their cultural sort of norm to have lots of children. Well, I strongly believe that a lot of that is kind of an outdated belief. Before the introduction of modern medicine, what happened is people would have 5 or 6 or 8 children because more than half of those children would die from disease, malaria, and all sorts of things. And so now with the introduction of modern medicine, people can have big families of 6, 7, 8 kids, and all those children are still surviving because of medicine, or they might lose maybe 1 to malaria or something like that. So essentially, there's this exponential growth rate of kids that traditionally wouldn't survive. Then the second thing is in a lot of the rural areas, a lot of poor people will have large families because that is their labor force to work on their farms. So, these are issues that creates a problem and a pressure on the natural resources. So this is really the cause of decline in a lot of our wildlife areas, and in my opinion, the biggest threat to conservation.
Thank you so much, Dave. I think the topic itself is actually quite an interesting one because, in essence, we understand that as human beings, we are obviously overpopulating in large portions of the world. And so that has caused a lot of environmental impact. But can we also then not look at education as being a way of then trying to limit our impact on some of the environmental issues that we're having at the moment? Is that something that we can look at before we start saying, all right, everybody, no more kids?
Absolutely. So guys, the point that I'm trying to make is, yes, growing human populations is the problem. So we are the problem, but we are also the solution. And there is no other way. So education is obviously key. I believe that many of these things can be overcome through education. I think a lot of you guys have seen all the clips and all the information that I've sent you during the week for you to look at. Education is absolutely the key. Why do we have education? Because unless people, I just want to take a little step back. What is the cause to a lot of these issues? The cause is a lot of typically and I'm not talking about urban populations now, I'm talking about more rural populations where people rely on those natural resources for survival. So for example, firewood, which is now morphed into a bigger problem, which is charcoal. We have never had a problem of people making charcoal and selling charcoal in this country. But in about the last probably 3 to 5 years, this problem has really grown exponentially. And so that in a way is part of education, because 5 years ago, you would drive down the road, let's say from Victoria Falls to Bulawayo, and you'd see people on the side of the road selling big stacks of wood. Now you drive to a lot of these places and you see people selling charcoal because they realize that it's very easy to make charcoal. All you do is dig a hole, throw a bunch of wood in there, put a few green leaves on top, cover it with sand, burn it so it burns slowly, and you've got charcoal, and you can sell it for more than you can sell it for wood. So now people are using charcoal as their preferred fuel choice to cook their food. And so the deforestation is going huge. These people that are cutting the trees down to either sell as wood or to make charcoal, they're not thinking about planting something behind them. So, you know, when is the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. When is the next best time? It's today. So once these people run out of a resource to be able to survive, only then does that situation motivate them to learn something else. So we need to get ahead of that curve by educating them in the beginning. And to me, the key is giving those people basically an affordable alternative to the system that they're using to survive right now. So instead of cutting down trees for wood or to make charcoal, a lot of those people in those rural areas have a couple of animals. We can, you know, educate them because most of them have never even heard of biogas. We can educate them, and you know, hopefully in time, once we have enough money to not only educate people but also to provide the very basic requirements to make a biogas digester. They all have a couple of animals. All you need is 2 or 3 cows. Collect the dung every day, put it into a biogas digester, and you've got biogas which you can use to cook your food. So you don't have to cut a tree down. And it's a whole lot cheaper to make your own biogas than it is even to go and buy a bag of charcoal. So there's the solution right there. But unless the people are educated to know how to do it and you know what it means to be able to set that up, it's, you know, we're not going anywhere.
No, I hear your point there, Dave, and I think that's a really interesting one. I see John's got his hand up for a question, so I'll hand over to John. Over to you.
No, very interesting, because obviously a lot of rural populations in Africa struggle terribly with just finding a financial wherewithal in order to be able to get by. And the money that they generate from the sale of charcoal and various other things is absolutely critical to the survival of their families. Biogas, I see, is one solution. But would you say that the majority of environmental money that goes out goes to specific species, and as opposed to looking at trying to change the environment, and maybe instead of them giving money towards a specific species, to rather go and put in solar for 500 homes or 1,000 homes or something like that? I feel that a lot of philanthropic people in this world who have the wherewithal in order to be able to change the way the world works are being almost, I wouldn't say duped, but are more likely to give their money towards causes which are not sustainable for the future.
John, I agree with you 100%. You know, we all know that the big issue in conservation is that people think, okay, well, in order to save a habitat, we need to look after the habitat, we need to put a fence around it, we need to protect it, we need to preserve it. Well, you know, there's a whole lot of pressure on those resources, and there's pressure on those resources because of where people are in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of those rural people are on the very bottom level. They're even just trying to find a meal for that day. So if they are cutting down trees and making charcoal, that's their attempt to try and move up to the next level. And it's very easy to go out to people and say to people, oh, well, you know what, give us your money and we will do anti-poaching. Because I believe that right now, anti-poaching is probably one of the biggest expenses, but it's not actually addressing the cause. It's just putting a plaster on the wound that's got a thorn in it. And until you remove that thorn, that wound is never going to heal. But you just keep putting that plaster on by doing anti-poaching. And it's important because you've got to keep the wound clean. But at the end of the day, until people, again, this comes into education. Education is also about not just educating the people on the ground as to how to use their resources or how they can better benefit from those resources, but it's also educating the public that are giving the money and saying to them, guys, you've got to understand, yes, we love the fact that you're giving us money for anti-poaching, but unless we start addressing the cause of the problem and start helping those people that are relying on those resources, it's going to be futile. So we need to use whatever it is. Let's say it's 30% of the money that comes in, and put it towards education. Put it towards giving people an alternative. Like, for example, the little video clip I shared with you about the woman in Uganda, who's got 1 acre of land, and she's divided that acre, 1 acre, 1/4 for her pigs, 1/4 for her cows, 1/4 for fish, and 1/4 for vegetables and things like that. And the way that she sort of uses everything to help everything else, it's an amazing thing. And so basically, that woman on her 1 acre, she doesn't need to have 5 kids to help her maintain that acre of land and farm it or whatever. She can manage that all on her own. So she doesn't need to have a large family. And the income that she's making from that 1 acre, because she's farming it so intensively and so smartly, means that she's actually getting a better return from that acre of land than she could do any other way. So, it's educating people not only how to use their resources, but also how to benefit more from what they have and get them up to the next level of Maslow's hierarchy, so that they now have a nice house, that they have a disposable income. That disposable income can afford to give their kids a better level of education. And once their kids have a better level of education, it just perpetuates, and that is what will get them out of the cardboard box.
That's a really good, a very valuable point that you make there, Dave, because in essence, it really is a sort of knock-on effect. Now, the man sitting with the best film noir lighting in the entire captain's run, Grant, would like to ask the next question. He's got the guns out as well. So, Grant, your mic is open.
Maybe I've got no zessa here. Hey? Thank you very much, Dave, and some very interesting stuff. My question is, it seems like there's a lot of ingredients to the problem, and there's a lot of ingredients to the solution as well. So you've mentioned the issues of sort of overpopulation, which results in land encroachment, which results in deforestation. And as time has gone on, that's turned into the whole charcoal trade side of things. And then there's the issue of funding, which helps you to provide resource for some of these solutions. There's the issue of education, but also going back to some of the other captains' runs with the other conservationists, it just seems like you guys are fighting a very, I want to call it a private battle, because it doesn't seem like there's policy intervention or policy assistance from the top down in the country. So, is there help for you guys on the ground from Ministry of Tourism or Ministry of Education, etc., to facilitate you guys going forward with these solutions to make sure, man and animal can coexist in a healthy way?
Thank you, Grant, and that's a really good question. And to answer it, I would say no, not even nearly enough. In my opinion, there's a lot of things that the government should and actually could be doing that they're not. I mean, like, for example, even the curriculum in schools. I mean, none of our kids actually have an actual curriculum that teaches them about, the fundamentals of, proper land use or, for example, single-use plastics. The government should and could be doing more about things like recycling. We had a classic example. I gave a talk in one of the schools, and we were talking about the use of single-use plastics, and how you can avoid it and how you should avoid it. And one of the kids put up their hand, and she said to me, but that's stupid because we live in a landlocked country. You know, she had no idea that every single thing, you drop something here in the sort of Borrowdale Flay and it's going to end up in a little stream that's going to end up in the Hinyani, which is going to end up in the Zambezi, which is going to end up in the ocean. And she thought, oh, well, we're a landlocked country. How is this plastic going to end up in the ocean? And to me, that's a very fundamental thing. I mean, why are these kids not learning this stuff? So, yeah, I believe that the government needs a much bigger drive to, you know, to educate kids on the very basics, on the fundamentals. And it's really something that, you know, I've been putting some stuff together now just to talk really at the schools that my kids go to. But this is something that I want to start really driving more and more and see if we can't get this built into the curriculum somehow.
I love that, because in essence, you're not just informing government to do more or asking for more cash. It's really about trying to get them to do something for the children to understand what their the power of their actions as well. Now, Dave Kirkman has a question that I know he wants to ask. He put his hand up virtually, so I'm going to hand over to him.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for coming on and giving us all the information over this week. I guess my question is based around the same as Grant, but I'd like to focus more on what you guys as conservationists are doing together to kind of get on the same track. Is there a group of you who will say, like, because obviously somebody who's in anti-poaching believes that their you know, their crusade is the top of the log, and somebody who's into deforestation thinks that they deserve all the money. Is there an agenda in terms of what is important to the conservation cause, and how do you divide it up to know which direction is the right direction to go? I mean, you can educate people, but look at the world today. A lot of the people running around looting and that are educated people. So how is education going to benefit the whole drive, and is that the most important way to go?
Thank you, David. And you know, that is a really good question. I think that there are a lot of us right now who've probably and it's been a fairly recent drive. It's been in the last maybe year or two where people have actually sat down and realized that this is a big problem. Is that, you know, we're all operating in our own little individual way and addressing little individual issues, which is, of course, it's important, not to take anything away from that. But we're also now starting to get together and believe that if we operate collectively, that there will be a bigger impact for sure. And, you know, this is really, again, somewhat in its infancy, because some of these organizations, like, for example, the International Poaching Foundation, you know, they've got a big set of donors in Europe and the rest of the world that are giving them the money to do what they do. And of course, their mandate is that, you know, that is their job and that's where the money's got to go. So it's actually working with these people. They're doing a lot of work right now. They're looking at taking over quite a few areas, like within Zimbabwe, that have been neglected. You know, from every angle, basically. There's no anti-poaching, there's no conservation work, there's no nothing. So, you know, they're starting right at the bottom. And the plan is actually to start getting more and more people together and start putting together a plan that will really move this thing forward. Because at the moment, that is the biggest problem, is that everybody is operating as an individual thing, and each person believes that their own agenda is the most important. Well, what we are certainly realizing is, yes, of course, anti-poaching is vital, and that will never go away. But that anti-poaching, or that the poaching that's going on in those areas, whether it's for wildlife, whether it's for food or whatever, that will never go away until people have an alternative. So unless we start addressing the cause, we're just throwing good money after bad. And so, you know, you're absolutely right. We need to actually start people moving together and working together. And I think the more that this sort of thing happens, and like, for example, this platform, I think is a fantastic platform to broaden the reach of knowledge, you know, to people that are out there donating money, to say, okay, guys, look, we're going to give you this money, but we insist that this percentage goes towards education, or this percentage goes towards providing an alternative for people living in those areas to be able to move up a step in Maslow's hierarchy. You know, one of the big issues that we have is the fact that, like with this COVID thing, for example, you know, we've been trying our best bordering in the wildlife areas bordering these communities to be able to provide a better economic incentive, providing jobs, whether it's in park management, whether it's in tourism, whether it's in growing vegetables to feed the tourists that come to those camps, whether it's someone that gets a job as a driver to be able to do transfers or whatever. That comes to a halt with this whole COVID thing. So, you know, that puts us a step back again.
No, I totally hear you there, because I don't think you've rambled it in any way, shape, or form. I think that you've basically talked about the fact that there has to be a collective that works together on making sure that the points are being made in the right way.
Yeah, Dave, an interesting theory. Not just going a little bit off the line, but with all the water that's coming into Kariba at the moment, I think it's rising in a couple of centimeters a day. But interesting enough, you know, I read an article way back, but in the 1950s, when the catchment area of Kariba was backed up. And we're going back to that holistic, you know, Alan Savory's theory of the rainfall evaporating. But just a question, do you think that Kariba would fill up again? Because in saying that, in the early 50s, when it was mapped, there was a lot of vegetation in the catchment area, and the rainfall actually didn't evaporate, it soaked into the soil and ran off, and that's what actually, you know, filled up Kariba in those early days when it was built. But today, you know, as I believe, there's a lot of sort of deforestation, and the vegetation in the ground is sort of is not there anymore. And any rainfall that falls in that Kariba catchment area is evaporating. So are the chances less now for Kariba to actually fall because of that situation of deforestation and the water not running off?
Kenyan, I don't believe so. You know, I can't remember exactly when it was, but it wasn't that long ago, maybe certainly within the last 8 or 10 years, that Kariba filled again. This year, I believe it'll fill again with the amount of the volume of water that's coming in. I would be surprised if it doesn't fill up completely. The biggest problem with deforestation is the fact that when you deforest an area, what happens is you start getting capping of the ground. So then when it rains, the water runs off. It doesn't actually soak into the ground. So that's the biggest problem with deforestation. And if you look at those video clips that I sent you about the holistic resource management, which is practiced by the guys near Vic Falls, what's his name? Alan Savory. Alan Savory was a guy who started that thing called holistic resource management. And what you realize is that when you start having areas that are degraded either through deforestation or actually low stocking rates of livestock, that's another problem. They tend to, when you have a low stocking rate, the animals tend to eat what they like. They become very selective. And once they've put pressure on all that, the less palatable plants start coming through. And then eventually over a period of time, it becomes degraded. So that's why he's shown that it's actually better to have a very high stocking rate. A lot of animals move through, but only spend a short time there. So what they do is they eat what they want, they trample what they don't want, and that also creates a bit of a mulch on the surface. And in time, what happens is the quality of those areas start improving. You get a mulch, you're not getting the earth being left barren for ages. So when it does rain, the water doesn't just run off, it actually soaks into the ground. And then you start getting a much healthier environment. So it's a very, very complex thing. It's not that easy. And, you guys might be surprised to hear this, but, is climate change happening? 100%. But I also am skeptical of some of the statistics that are thrown around as to how much of that is actually man-made. I think a lot of the climate change has also been driven by things like massive volcanic eruptions that spew tons and tons of carbon into the atmosphere every day. I mean, it's a known fact that some of these big volcanoes that can erupt for years at a time, in one day, they spew more carbon than what we can save in 4 years. So, that's a contributing factor that people don't take into consideration. Doesn't mean we have to stop doing what we're doing. Hell no, we've got to do whatever we can and just keep chipping away. But I also believe that a lot of the climate change is also a natural phenomena.
And I guess not too many people would disagree with that assertion. I think that obviously we have to look at our impact on the planet as well, and then take it all as a holistic, I suppose, idea in terms of understanding how we all impact this planet that we live on. Time is running a bit short, but I'm going to hand over to John because I know he had a question to ask before we wrap up.
Yeah, Dave, I was super excited when I watched the video with Dr. Alan Savory. It encompasses absolutely everything from cropping to protection of livestock to the wildlife and game industry and everything else. And it's the first time that I've actually seen a total solution to the whole environmental issue. And I would encourage anybody who ever watches this is to get on and actually have a look at that, because I do truly believe that we've at last found somebody who's got a proper solution out there. But my real question to you, Dave, is this: it seems that so many environmentalists are not singing off the same song sheet. There is a huge multitude of people out there, probably millions of them, who have all got their own agendas. It would certainly help everybody out there if there was one song sheet that everybody could sing from, so that we knew what to support, how to support it, and then the education process would actually make a huge change. What are your thoughts on that?
John, you know what, to a very large extent, I agree with you. And the reason that I honestly believe that people do sing off different song sheets is because people are driven by different agendas. I'm a person whose entire livelihood has been made up. I've made my entire livelihood from wildlife and from the environment. And so, I'm not one of those people that, like, for example, if you take some of these so-called animal rights activist groups, they are completely and utterly driven by money. I mean, someone like the American Humane Society are like the worst of the worst. They're the biggest anti-hunting sentiment out there. They basically drive an agenda driven by emotion, because they know that pulling on people's heartstrings is going to get them to donate money. And they make millions and millions of dollars every year, but they don't put anything into conservation per se. It all goes into basically feathering their own nest. So their agenda is completely skewed. And you can actually go onto various sites and see, how much money they actually donate. A lot of these guys, less than 10% of the money they make will actually go to the cause, but they drive this thing. It's just to basically fill their own pockets. Are they conservationists? In my opinion, they're the furthest thing from it. But when you actually look at the real sort of conservation organizations, it's really important to sort of have a look at their motives and break it down. Are the agendas that they're driving being really scientifically based, models to be able to provide a solution? Are they looking at the real science behind the problem, and are they addressing that? Because I believe that more and more, if they were being driven by proper science-based solutions, they would be addressing the cause, not just the problem. And I think that everyone is singing off it, or many people are singing off different song sheets because they're driven by different motives. So whether it's a selfish motive about putting money in your pocket, or whether it's a motive that's really driven about making sure that this does survive. I mean, I like to look at things in a much more holistic manner, only because I've realized, I mean, in the 30 odd years that I've been in the industry and working at it, I've my opinion of what needs to be addressed has changed, constantly changed, and it's constantly evolving, because I've got to a point in my life now where I realize that, we need to address the cause, not just the problem. And a lot of people in their sort of evolution of trying to do effective conservation, maybe they haven't got to that point in their sort of thinking yet. Maybe they haven't evolved to that point in their thinking yet. So I think that is the thing, and I think that education is the key, and starting to strategize for people to work together, I think is important. I think that is the key.
Well, I think that is a point well made there, Dave. It's at this point I'm going to have to end today's Captain's Run, but I'm going to ask you all to do me a favor. So please, if you don't mind, all unmuting your mics, so we can actually have a little bit more participation on your end as well. And as we've done in past Captain's Runs, one of the things that I want to do is to sort of thank Dave for all of his contributions throughout the week, and especially for today, but also to do a little bit of an applause for everybody on the front line working in their conservation areas, and for those who are, helping communities in need, and also a little bit of a thank you to all of your teammates who couldn't be here as well. So if you don't mind, let's do a little bit of applause for everybody. And I see John going above and beyond, trying to get the points at the final hurdle.
Cyrus, if I could just add, right at the end here, just obviously thanks to you for running a really, what I think is a fantastic Captain's Run here. Dave, such great points. To all of you guys, the questions and the stuff, it's just critical, and we've captured this. And I think it's so important to have these discussions, and we're going to continue to do that. Guys, just from our side, something that I think I'd like to add on this whole conservation front, Dave, and I mean, you sowed a seed with me the other day, got me thinking on this, but education of kids is one thing, and even education of businesses and education of sports people is another. But something just to give us hope, one of the organizations we're linked to here is an organization called Victoria Falls EnviroWatch. So I also sit on that trust, and we had an opportunity to sit with the Zimbabwe Parliamentary Committee on Environment, and they actually sent up a representative team to Victoria Falls, and we did a presentation to them. Now that little presentation went a huge way to opening the eyes of these parliamentarians to some of these issues. And I think sometimes we just assume, because we see so much, unfortunately, not going so right in our country on a political front, that these options are not available to us. But something we intend to do more in the future is work with the decision makers in our country, top businessmen and sports people like yourselves, to have more of an effect and bring together people like Dave, and obviously Gavin and Mark and Ivan, and try and get these presentations done at a high level, so that very quickly we can get decisions that It just sort of, we seem to be stale in the way we do things. I take one small example, Cyrus, I don't want to take too long, but you know, when properties get allocated to people in Zimbabwe, still even in, you know, in residential areas like in Victoria Falls as an example, you're still handing out properties where people have got sort of 30-meter by 40-meter stands, and then your law is that you can only build one residence on there and so on, and you start to get this massive sprawl. You see it when you drive out of Harare, and we're seeing these areas sprawling out, and as a result, the people moving out. To try and revolutionize that in the development of our towns and cities in Zimbabwe and in other parts of Africa. And they're certainly open to that discussion and trying to figure out new ways of developing and dealing with our populations. And just an example of the reaction that we got from this parliamentary committee was really welcome. And I think on the back of chatting to you, Dave, and the others, we're going to do more of that type of work. Thanks very much, Cyrus, and thanks to all you guys for fantastic Captain's Run this morning.
Our wildlife needs help. Tourism to Africa is at an all-time low. You can assist by liking and sharing the conservation games. You can contribute financially by hitting the donate button on the Zambezia.com website. Let's get together and back up the frontline conservation team.